He says hello. So this video is going to be about being a pansexual, transsexual. Now they sound very similar, don't they? Pansexual, transsexual. You might think they're similar. Transsexual is to do with gender. Pansexual is to do with sexuality. Now, I've covered what being a transsexual is in a lot of separate videos, and I've explained that it's not to do with psychology, but rather biology and genetics. And that's a fairly long argument, so I will just summarize transsexual rather than cover it in any detail again. So transsexual is the idea, as I say, it's a matter of gender. So male and female are terms we're used to, but someone who might appear as male might actually be someone with a more complicated gender, someone who's actually female. Now, if you want to explore what being transsexual means in more detail, please look at my other videos and their TV series you can check out and other people's videos, so I'm not going to go into any more detail. So, in the same sense that we might think there's such a thing as male and female, equally there is such a thing as a transsexual woman, and the same evidence that backs up male and female also backs up transsexual woman in a different way, and the other videos do explain that. So to go on from the idea of gender and to move across to the idea of sexuality. Well, with gender, it may have an effect on who you're attracted to. Women may potentially be attracted to different people than men, but it's not not a fundamental difference, gender, in terms of who you're attracted to. There might be some effect, but it's not the main driver. Okay, you go off now, cat. What the main driver is what we call sexuality. And sexuality and gender are different dimensions. It's a lot like height and weight. There may be some sort of relationship, but in a fundamental sense, they are quite different. So, sexuality. Well, what is common in today's society is someone being straight or heterosexual. That is, they're attracted to the opposite sex. What is equally, well, not equally common, what is also common is homosexuality, or someone being attracted to the same sex. Now, what someone called Kinsey said was that everyone is bisexual. And that argument is the argument that a man would be attracted to both a man and a woman. And that even though that man might not make that public, might hide it, for example, that would still be a fairly basic characteristic. And we're not saying that 100% of men would feel this way, but what Kinsey is saying, based on his research, is that the vast proportion of men would feel that way, and that would also have experiences sexually that would demarcate them in that way, and that the same is true equally of women. And we're sticking here to the binary classes, male, female, and we're only doing that for simplicity's sake. Because once we start talking beyond the binary classes, well, there's a large variety. And pansexual is one part of that large variety. You basically go from heterosexual to homosexual, and that complicates the picture, shall we say. Then we go from homosexual to bisexual. That complicates the picture further, and this is one interpretation. And bisexual people could potentially have relationships with people of either gender. Now, for pansexual people, the horizon is wider than for bisexual people. So pansexual people could be attracted to males, females, transsexual women, transsexual men, genderqueer people, if they decide they're genderqueer men or genderqueer women, non-binary people. In that sense, being pansexual means you don't discriminate in terms of gender when you're looking for a date. So, as someone who is pansexual, it means if I start talking to a girl and we hit it off, well, it's possible we might go on a date. Or if I start talking to a guy and we hit it off, then it's possible we might go on a date. Or, equally, if I start talking to a genderqueer person and we hit it off, we might go on a date. So it's a very broad remit. So we've covered the definitions, and I think I won't cover much more than that. But what I would say is you as a person, or me as a person, are influenced by our own perceptions from our own gender and our own sexuality. So if you understand the world that you can, if you understand the world in terms you date the opposite sex, that is the way you relate to the world, that's the way you feel, what's the word I'm searching for? If you understand the world in a certain way, you may struggle to understand in other ways. So you may find it, for example, very easy to understand why a man would be attracted to a woman. That feels the way for you, perhaps. And you might find it more difficult to understand the way a man could be attracted to a man. And gay people would find it, or do find it, from conversations I've had with them, equally difficult to understand why someone who could be attracted to a man could also be attracted to a woman. Gay people often find it difficult to understand bisexuality. And then to go to transsexuality, you have to realize that transsexuality, although the word sexual is there, it's not a sexuality. That's quite a confusing term, really, in that sense. That's why some people prefer the term transgender. But transsexuality is to do with gender, not to do with sexuality, whereas pansexuality is to do with sexuality. I see, I'm just thinking, is there some way I could clarify this? Now, I suppose one point I could say to clarify is that being pansexual, a lot like bisexual, means that you're attracted to the person rather than the gender. Now, that isn't universally true, but that's one way of explaining things. So, if I meet a person, I don't perhaps look at their body parts and say, you've got a nice upper body or you've got a nice lower body. Instead, I might talk to them and say, oh, that's a clever person. I like this person. Or I might say, you have a lovely smile. Or perhaps I wouldn't say that, but I would think that. So attraction could work in a different way, potentially. And I think in my own case, I'm attracted to attitude. That's one of the things I'm attracted to. So often someone can be quite mysterious or quite intriguing, and these things aren't necessarily a function of gender, and they aren't necessarily a function of sexuality. And anyone could have these characteristics, and so you can be attracted to the sort of person someone is, or to them individually as a person, without necessarily having been attracted to their actual gender. But equally, there are differences. And again, if we stuck to the simple binary case of man and woman, well, men have certain characteristics, and women have certain characteristics in this simple case. And it's possible to be attracted to either one of those characteristics, and that's a feature of bisexual people and pansexual people. So I suppose apples and oranges is a metaphor I would use. Some people might like only oranges, some people might like only apples, but some people might like both apples and oranges, and some people might like all the fruits and all the vegetables and a packet of crisps and fizzy pop as well. They might have wide tastes. And people who have very wide tastes in terms of who they date, well, they expand beyond the binary, and they expand to bisexuality and then perhaps to pansexuality. And there's nothing, how would I put it? There's nothing what I could call unorthodox. You can think that being pansexual doesn't mean that you'd be someone who would stick out. So you might be someone who's stuck out, or you might not. I mean, you could. I think often people who have strong Christian religious convictions have trouble understanding people who are different in terms of their gender and their sexuality. So that is what I would make this relate to, in that you could be someone who was pansexual and you could have strong religious views, you could go to church every Sunday, but then the situation of your life would be that at one point you could be in a relationship with a woman, and 6 months later you could be in a relationship with a man, and 2 years later you could be in a relationship with a transsexual woman. And that is just part of the way you see the world and you experience the world. So I hope I've given you a flavour of what being a transsexual, pansexual is like. And I think I would conclude with something that a girl I was dating told me one time, and we'll call her S. So I inquired at one point about S's sexuality, and she told me my sexuality is S, which was her name. Now, I found that quite profound, and I suppose it's because I'd never really heard that before. But she was expressing the view that she didn't see herself as fitting into any box, that perhaps no boxes existed, that her sexuality was the same as her as a person, there was no difference. And for a lot of people, that is the way they would choose to express themselves. It isn't the way I choose to express myself. I choose to hop into some boxes, not because they're a perfect fit, but because when I'm explaining myself to other people, then if I say my sexuality is my name, then they don't know what my sexuality is. And they might actually be interested, either just generally or someone might actually want to date. Or they might just be kind of curious, how does this work? How does this person think? How do we relate to them? Can we be friends with them? And I think that's where describing yourself in boxes can be useful. And so even though it's not a perfect fit, it's not even a wonderful fit, it's not even a very good fit, I describe myself as a pansexual transsexual, mainly for the benefit of other people, so that they can have some sort of handle on how I relate to the world. So I hope that has been helpful. Thank you.